Eddie Hearn, director of the Ladbrokes PDC World Darts Championships, also, of course, director of Matchroom Sport. Approaching the end of 2014, you're here at the PDC World Darts Championships, but how would you assess the year in Matchroom boxing?
It's been a roller coaster, you know, over 20 shows we've had, 12 World Championship fights as well, all over the world. We've put our fighters in some really, really tough fights, which has been criticised at times, but I thought that's what it was all about, to be honest with you, trying to be in the biggest fights for the biggest amount of money. Some great nights, you know, Barker beating Kell for the IBF middleweight title, Froch beating Kessler, Froch against Groves, you know, controversy aside, a wonderful night, and you know, plenty more to come in 2014.
Before we look ahead to 2014, let's reflect some more on 2013, the year that's just gone by. As you say, an incredibly emotional year with highs and lows. What was the high point for you from a personal standpoint?
I think personally, probably the Darren Barker victory. You know, knowing what he'd come back from. You know, he's had many problems in his life through personal tragedy and injuries and illnesses. And sort of myself and Tony Sims, really a year ago, talked him back into fighting when he was in the wilderness, and we manufactured him a world title shot, and he went to Atlantic City and beat Daniel Gill, and that was, you know, a very, very memorable moment for us, very rewarding, probably from a boxing sense in terms of sort of distinction. Probably Carl Froch rematching Kell Kessler for the two belts, the IBF and the WBA super middleweight belts, and winning that was a big moment. But also, you know, although they got beat, taking some of the smaller names, because Gavin Rees is a former world champion, but into the Broner fight in Atlantic City, he was beaten in 5 rounds or so. And even Lee Purdy fighting Devon Alexander totally out of nowhere. It's great that those people get the chance to experience those kind of nights. And sometimes that can be just as rewarding. Tony Bellew went out and fought Adonis Stevenson and got beat. But, you know, all these experiences, in my opinion, you know, make you become a better fighter. And I think you saw that with Darren Barker, having lost to Sergio Martinez in late 2012. I believe that's one of the reasons he went on to beat Daniel Gill, because he'd already experienced Atlantic City and experienced the bright lights and the big nights in America prior to the Gill victory.
With regard to the Darren Barker story, as you say, you talked him back into the sport after all the personal physical injury problems, personal family tragedies and disappointments he's had in his life. Given that he's invested so much and it's been such a tumultuous journey for him to get to that world title, was it almost inevitable, or how strong an inevitability was it, that he was going to be a short reigning champion, given the struggle it was to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I talked before the Stern fight about his desire, having given so much in the Gill fight. He really wanted to win. He trained really hard. He had some niggles in the camp, but he has niggles in every camp, as do most fighters. He's got an ongoing hip problem. He's had 2 hip operations. Sturm came in very motivated. Obviously, we went to Germany. The deal was too good to turn down. We had the rematch, or still got it if we want. Ultimately, his body gave up on the night, and I think ultimately, if we're honest, he left a little bit of his, you know, the Gill fight took a piece of him. You know, he gave everything that night, and I don't think he's got much more to give. And you know, after the fight and back at the hotel, it was, you know, he had all his family around him. It was he had a look on his face, and his family had a look on his face of satisfaction in that, you know, they'd won the world title. And the reason that I wanted to bring him back into boxing is because I don't think he could have retired feeling like he's achieved what he could have achieved in the sport. And he's quite a complex character mentally, and I think he would have struggled to come to terms with that. And I feared for him in life outside of boxing, having not achieved his goals. I'm not saying those goals were necessarily to be a world champion, but just to compete at that level. And now that he's won the world title, I know that he could retire from boxing a happy man. Financially, he's in a great position, which is, again, the most important thing as far as I'm concerned for a fighter. But ultimately, he can look back on his career and say, "I've been a world champion." And he was a world championship. He was a world champion at middleweight, you know, and he won the IBF belt. It's a big deal. You look at those past IBF champions in middleweight. It's an unbelievable list. So he's being assessed at the moment. My gut feeling, as it was on the night, was that that was the end for Darren Barker. He has got the rematch in London if he wants it, which is always tempting, a chance to get your belt back and another big payday. But I think that Darren, he's the kind of person that, unless he feels he can really do himself justice, he won't take that fight. And I'm seeing him tomorrow, but again, my feelings are the same as after the fight. I think that'll be the end.
And that's from a physical standpoint with the hip, or from an intangible standpoint of desire and motivation?
Desire to come back from another injury. I think if he wanted to, he could fight again. He could take some time out. He could have another operation, which he looks like he's going to have, and maybe come back in 8, 10, 12 months. But you know, he's come back so many times from so many different injuries. I'm not sure he'd have the desire to come back from yet another career-threatening injury to fight again, to achieve what? To win his belt back? You know, he's been world champion, he's achieved a lot, and, you know, like he says, he wants to chase his kids around and you know, be in good health. And hip operations are no joke, you know, like, you talk about hip replacements, and they've already said to him, you may need a hip replacement in time, which is worrying in itself at 31. You know, so I'm happy if he turned around to me tomorrow and said, you know, I'm done, I'd be over the moon for him.
Now, as you say, towards the end of the year, as part of that big run of boxing that Matchroom put on, one of the contests up in Manchester, Carl Froch against George Groves. Terrific contest. George Groves probably elevating his stock despite the defeat. Now, because of the manner of the fight and the way he performed and the manner in which it ended, what is the next step for both of those boxers? I know you've got an interest in Froch. Groves is a free agent. How keen are you to see those guys get it on again?
Well, as a fan, I'm very keen. I think it was a wonderful fight, one of the best I've seen live. And it was controversial. I mean, from where I was sitting on the night, it felt like a good stoppage, and then when I watched it back, it felt like it was a bit early. Carl Froch is devastating in that position, and you would have to fancy him to go on to stop George Groves, whether it be in the next 10, 20 seconds or later in the round or in 10, 11, 12. He was starting to find a way back in the fight. Groves was brilliant in the fight. I mean, I've never seen so much drama as the first knockdown. I think that whole 20,000 people just went quiet, you know. But for me, there's too much money in the fight, there's too much demand for the fight for it not to happen again. But it takes time because there was a lot of ego involved in the fight. They don't like each other at all. They still don't like each other at all. Carl Froch probably feels like he doesn't really want to give George Groves another shot, and George Groves probably feels like he deserves a huge piece of the pie. So they're the stumbling blocks. But again, when everyone sits down, if everyone's sensible, I think it can get made, and I think it's likely to get made. But there's a lot of work to do.
Well, we look forward to that announcement when that time comes, if it comes, when it comes. They're the guys that have been to the mountaintop, won world titles, challenged for world titles. How excited are you about the prospects you've got coming through? The Olympians, the younger fighters that are emerging as well, Martin J. Ward, and of course the Olympic champs, Anthony Joshua and Luke Campbell. How excited are you about them? What does 2014 hold and beyond? Well,
I think, you know, the two standouts, Luke Campbell and Anthony Joshua, the two gold medalists. I think the pedigree of these fighters, particularly Luke Campbell, had over, I think, 150 bouts as an amateur. He was the most successful amateur of all time. You know, won world championship gold, won Olympic gold. He's a phenomenal fighter. You know, already now, although it sounds strange, I don't feel as though he's that far away from world level. He's only had 4 fights now. And Joshua looks an extraordinary talent. More raw than Campbell, probably only 40 fights himself as an amateur, but already in the pro game he looks great. You know, from a charisma standpoint, from a personality standpoint, he's got all the tools as well. I think he can be a huge star in the game. But, you know, even beyond that, looking at the likes of, like say, Martin Ward, Callum Smith looks like a great prospect, Cal Yafai, so many great fighters. And even just above that, you know, Lee Selby is a great fighter. Brian Rowe's going to challenge for the world title. Scott Quigg is already a world champion. Kevin Mitchell find a way back. Young Tommy Coyle in Hull. Tony Bellew will return at cruiserweight. There's so many. Kell Brook's on the verge of a world title fight. There's so many great fighters at Matchroom now, and so many world title opportunities. But the future really looks bright. But, you know, Joshua and Campbell are probably the two standouts moving into 2014.
How crucial is your job and the job of the matchmakers for guys like that, as you say, world silver for both Josh and Campbell, European gold for Luke Campbell as well, and that Olympic title. So how crucial is your job as a matchmaker, given the skill set that they have? How do you go about matching them without them getting bored and without putting them in too deep too quickly?
Yeah, it's a mixture really. I mean, some nights you're going to get easier touches than others, but I want to step them up at a constant pace. But it's just a case of sucking it and see on each different level. So, you know, Joshua, for example, You know, he fought an undefeated fighter in his first fight, fought more of a journeyman in the second fight, fought an Eastern European with a fairly decent record in the third who was quite poor. Next he'll fight Dorian Darch, which is quite a nice step up. And the good thing about that is he'll fight him in Cardiff, which is Darch's hometown. He'll have big support there. And it'll be a new experience going to the Lion's Den. Every time they fight, it's got to be a new experience that brings, you know, something else to their game. And obviously they're getting paid great money, so I want them to be in great fights as well. It's nothing more frustrating than me to see them knocking out someone in a round who was useless, and I've got to pay them a fortune. You know, so I want to see them learn, and I want to see them tested. Obviously they won't be tested to the full in their first 4, 5, 6 bouts, but I think they've both got the ability, and definitely Campbell, to fight for the British title in the next couple. And when you look at the depth of the heavyweight division, Anthony Joshua, for example, I believe can fight for the heavyweight title in 4 or 5 fights. But again, he may be stepped up to a level and not look as impressive, and that's the time where you just put the brakes on a little bit and say, oh, he's not quite ready, let's keep him at that level, you know, and build. But I think we've got a good mix. You know, I'll listen carefully to the trainers of those 2 fighters as well, and ultimately we'll all decide together the way to go. But I don't think there's many in the country that could test, you know, those guys, and even the elite level fighters in the lightweight and the heavyweight division. I think they could mix with them already. So, you know, I think they'll be moved along at a steady pace and the right pace.
You talked about the atmosphere that Joshua's going to face when he fights in February in Cardiff. You've got a terrific atmosphere here. It's the middle of the week, but yet the place is full and the fans are having a great time. How do you generate such an atmosphere at this event? How do you go about translating that to boxing on a weekly basis? How do you go about generating this type of atmosphere and translating it to your other events?
Well, it's frustrating because this sells so well. Every arena we go to around the country is virtually a sellout for the darts, and boxing is a tough sell. I believe it's...
Why? Why is it a tough sell?
I don't know. I mean, this is about the night out. This is about the experience, you know, and I don't think boxing delivers a night out and an atmosphere and an experience like the darts. I do feel like it's a better sport, but I don't know what it is about this event. I mean, don't get me wrong, I go and have a great time, and darts is great to watch, it's exciting, but people will still say, yeah, but it's just darts. So what is it that turns the public on so much to deliver 2, 3 times the viewing audience of a big fight? You know, not just in terms of the arena selling out, people have a great time. It's crushing the audience numbers of boxing. In fact, it's crushing the audience numbers of pretty much every other sport outside of football. You know, so what is it? And you can't just say that it's people in the arena having a great time. It's people at home watching it having a great time. You know, it's great to watch. It's exciting. It's very tense. But there's something about the culture in that hall that makes people love it, and I'm trying to bring a little bit of that to boxing, because the formula here is right, and it's about people leaving the arena and the hall thinking they've had the greatest night ever, and that's what you want to always give to a fan as a promoter, whether it's boxing, whether it's darts, or whether it's snooker, you know. And there's no one who leaves here without saying that was a brilliant night.
Indeed, all the fans are having a great night. A lot of fans having a great night at your Matchroom Boxing. We hope to see more of it in 2014. You've given us a terrific insight here on Tungsten Tales. Neddy, all the best for this season, and very best in 2014 as well.
Thanks, Ron.